Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming. Much.
So this is not a regular occurrence that we get to see the two of you together.
Well, not regular, but it's not the first time.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd love to start with you, Richard, if you don't mind, and
Please.
looking for, because I'm interested in if you can bring us back to the person who wrote Wildlife, 1990. The context of your life and also your writing career that sort of brought you to write that story, because there's certain aspects of that I want to visit or revisit for you, but I'm just curious if you can remember how you began the novel, where it started for you.
Precisely. I can remember exactly where it began. I was living in Missoula, Montana, and I was living a little bit north of Missoula up what's romantically called the Rattlesnake Valley, Rattlesnake Gulch. And it was a year of forest fires, and there were forest fires all over. And I was in my house, and the declivity is very steep, and I walked out onto the deck of my house, and really right across the little tiny valley there, it was ablaze. Mm. And I thought, well, if the wind changes, I'm toast here. And I, because I'm a novelist, I thought, I have to write about this. I have to write about this. This is what Henry James calls a donné. This is a given for me. So I did. Mm-hmm. And I started writing it there in that house in Missoula. And then, it's not a very long book. And then I moved down to Tennessee for the winter to a friend of mine's house where I could work on it and also go quail hunting every day. And first things first. And so I finished it down there in Tennessee. Yeah.
And your protagonist, Joe, is 17.
More or less, 16, 17.
16, 17, and it's 1960.
Yes.
Which is how old you were in 1960.
Yes, that's right.
So why is that? Like, why did you...
Well, I think it's probably a year in the life of an adolescent boy or a girl, mm-hmm. when you're kind of got one foot in one period of your life, adolescence, and one tentative foot in the next period of your life, which is a young adult. So it's innately dramatic.
Sure.
Things happen to you, and you navigate them, and you engage them in a very complex way with a lot of things that are not clear, and the living makes them clear.
There was a story in the New Yorker this August, maybe?
Yes.
That was 16, right?
I guess I'm stuck there. I guess I'm just
But and
when in doubt, make somebody be 16.
I was excited when I saw that.
So was I, actually. But I thought, though, Paul, that it was such an old-fashioned story that the New Yorker would never publish it, because it was, not so different formally from the kinds of stories that I've written in the past. But again, I was wrong.
But I was excited when I saw 16, because it just must have been such a, profound time for you.
Well, it was. It was
age.
A year when my father died,
right.
and not to say that books that one writes are inevitably autobiographical, but it is still the case in my life that I think that for me, the working out of these stories is the working out of a life beyond a calamity, which my life never quite got to do. And so that the fiction is to some extent compensatory. But that's not a formula for how fictions work in general.
Right.
It's just how those particular ones
right.
didn't do or tried to.
Well, I mean, it's an incredible portrait of a relationship between a father and son, Wildlife, and it's hard not to wonder about, because it's sort of ability to sort of explore that type of relationship past that point during which you had an opportunity.
You get it sometimes with a set of subjects and a set of emotional engagements. You get a kind of a seam, and in my job, if I'm going to take my job seriously, is to just mind that seam till there's no more language left. And if I have to go at it and go at it and go at it, 25 years later, I'll go at it again, because it's a rich seam, because everybody's been 16. Everybody's had that moment in which life changes forever. And there's the end of Frank O'Connor's little story called The Guest of the Nation. These kids they're in the Irish Republican Army. And at the end of the story, the last line is, in anything that happened to me afterward, I never felt the same about again. If I could put that at the end of every story that I write, I'd be really happy.
So, but 16 that age is incredibly ripe. I mean, there's a way in which every year we've ever been accumulates, and we're always that age because we've lived our life through that period of time. And yet 16, 17, that's an incredibly, whether or not we've had tragedy in our lives, we become ourselves in some form. Is that one of the things that you saw in wildlife in terms of wanting to explore it, Paul, was being able to basically not just a story where there is a character that age, but it's really from the point of view of somebody that age?
Yeah, so this is a good time to say that in our film, Joe is 14. Mm-hmm. And, I actually find that sort of exciting now because I think for me, one, that was an age where I moved to a new town, and to begin high school in a new school in a new town is kind of a big deal, to leave your friends. And it's also kind of the moment when I felt like I woke up and one day, like, my parents were different that age. So, and the marriage different, and just things different and moving. So for where I am in Richard's book is actually at 14, and that might be the resonant age for me if I ever revisit something again. And I've also felt that trying to sort of just justify why to make it 14, that I think just to a modern audience, 16 felt a little old almost. And I remember the feeling when I moved to a new town of like my family is all I had, because I didn't have the school life yet, and I didn't have, so that feeling of the home being the edge of the world, in me.
And how did changing that affect writing through the screenplay? And because you had the novel, you had the events as they're seen through the eyes of Joe at that slightly older age. How did that affect, or did it affect the events and the way that whether he perceives the events?
No, that felt like a natural, transition, so to speak, 16 or 14. And one of the nice things about working in a period is you're dealing with more essentials, just meaning we're not having to worry about technology. We're not having to worry about the what a kid is doing at 14 and 16 is really different actually in high school. Like what music you're listening to is really different, or like what. But that's not what this was about. Right. So it felt like an easy transition. And yes, like through, the book is actually written looking back on the events, and that was one of the big challenges immediately because Richard's language is so beautiful and it's so tempting to use as voiceover. And it felt pretty clear immediately that we should at least try as writers in making this our own to make it present tense, but hopefully have the feeling of memory almost, or the weight of nostalgia or myth or something, or just somehow have the feeling of that, but to start the film and just be with the kids' experience of like, hey, like life's good and life is what I've known it to be, and then stepping into I guess adulthood.
It should be said that that's what Paul just described is an immense change from. I mean, I don't like to use the expression translate a novel into film. I'd rather have it be that they use my book in whatever way they can use my book and then make a film of their own. But to change something that is in the first person, look retrospective, into a narrative which is present tense, all the verbs are present tense, is a huge ethical change. It's a huge formal change. It's not simple. It's not easy. It affects the dramatics of everything, because in a narration which is in the present tense, looking back, you have a kind of zone of comfort because everybody's survived enough for this to be told. But you don't have that in this movie. There is this constant sense of breaking action right at the edge of present tense.
Well, and film is so interesting because film it's persuasively present but it's also always past because we were watching something that has been made and prepared. So like that sort of sense of past present isn't like always a factor when you're watching a film. And so I think in a way you have that as an asset, that you can make something that is in the present tense like your film and feel like the past because there is a sense of like the scenes themselves carry the weight of being projected into the future in some ways.
That's good. I might take that with me. Yeah.
But it seems related to the notion of point of view. That sometimes a way of selling a first-person point of view in a film is to give a voiceover. So we're hearing somebody's voice in our head, which is maybe a sense of how a novel is written, where you're having that, you know, there are words from somebody that are, it's first person. We're getting that, but that problem, as you're figuring out in film, seems to be a past-present issue as well in terms of selling. Like in some sense, we are seeing the film, the actions through his eyes, and yet film is not actually through somebody else's eyes. There are point of view shots which are not from behind his eye. You know, like, so that seems like a related issue to figure out.
Well, and that was actually really interesting in terms of writing the script and sort of exploring what if we had more scenes of Jerry and Jeanette alone. And
right.
We did that just in an attempt at first probably to understand them. And I feel like one of the really intoxicating elements of Richard's book was the mystery of who our parents are. Like, that felt really exciting to me. And probably trying to understand Jerry and Jeanette was a means of understanding something, you know, in myself. But so we pushed it a little bit more where let's go off with them more. And then we felt, no, the power of it is really in the reveal of information and information to the kid. Mm-hmm. But if we stayed just strictly with the kid, it felt too small suddenly. Mm-hmm. So, you know, even in the edit room, there were times where there's a scene where we're with Joe out of the house, and then there's a scene where he's back at the house, and sometimes we'd jump ahead to like Jeanette, and then Joe would enter, and that's a very subtle, mm-hmm. you know, it's not sticking with Joe's point of view at that point, mm-hmm. but the spirit of it is laid there from the beginning. So like, I think when you start a film and it's clearly through him, mm-hmm. then you have the opportunity to, you know, play a little bit stylistically. Mm-hmm. With touching perspectives.
What happened when you shot? Did you actually shoot some scenes with the two of them together, or did you just sort of contemplate them?
Well, no. Well, we shot some scenes where like Jerry's at work, right, yep. and then when Jeanette's like in town, and
the boys nowhere.
Yeah, and the boys nowhere. But there's just a couple of those in the film. There is a scene. There's a couple cut scenes, yeah, of solo Jerry scenes and solo Jeanette. Yeah.
And did it just feel distracting, or did it feel what wasting of something that you thought was an asset?
I think, you know, it's funny because we made such an effort, especially like making a period film on a budget, to make our script as lean as possible.
Of course.
And yet there were still scenes that once we're in the edit room, it felt like we just don't need it, is the answer. Okay. We just didn't need it. And
you get some of it back anyway. You get some of it back for just simply how much time Jeanette is alone in the camera side. You get some of that point of view sort of filtering back to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember feeling when I saw the film at Sundance, I was kind of blown away by how clean it is. I know that I understand there's I forget the word you just used in terms of it being a low-budget independent film, so it had to be kind of lean, I think, in terms of what was written and what you could pull off. But I also just think stylistically, there's really nothing extraneous. There's nothing extra. And I think for a debut film, you just never see that. It's your opportunity to prove that you've got a style, that you've got something new to offer around the edges, and you just you pull back from that. And I hadn't read Wildlife yet. I'd read a number of your other works, but I'd never read Wildlife. And it was extraordinary to see how I would use similar vocabulary to describe the novel. There's something very clean about that. There's not a lot of extra around the edges. It feels very direct. But that's not an easy thing to then actually pull off. Like how something works that way on the page, and then how something works that way tonally, stylistically in a film can be quite different.
Yeah, so not only did I respond to the book on a highly personal, emotional level. But if I could write, you know, I would probably want to write like in Wildlife or in Rock Springs. It's just a type of prose or the way the language works that just I love. And I think part of it is because there's a spareness to it, it feels like stuff kind of like bursts out from under it or in the spaces or something. I don't know. It's like, you know, one thing I said to the crew sometimes, just trying to like figure out how to talk about like window treatments, which I've never had to talk about before, like fabric, you know, was I say like it's like sushi, like it looks simple, but like, you know, it's not. And there's just something in the clarity of the writing. And I don't know what you would call that. I'd be curious actually what that feels like to you.
I would call it premise. I would say that if you're writing about the most important things that can happen to a family, you can spare it down, because you're never, what's at stake, what's important is never not in front of you, and so you can do less than that because what's going on, this family is disintegrating or in jeopardy of disintegrating, and it's been told by its most vulnerable part. You've got so much going for you in what it's about that you can underplay it a little bit. You can under dramatize it, and you get I always try to tell students when I talk to them is to write about the most important things you know. And make your stories be about the most important things there are. Because then once you have that going for you, you can stylistically, formally, you can treat it any way you want to.
I wonder if that helps the reader meet the characters. Do you know, like bringing yourself to, because like when you're not overly told, I mean, I think this was one of the hopeful goals about the style of the filmmaking, was to not be like reductive. You know, by overstating it or overshooting it or overscoring it or over camera moving it or whatever, you know, so that because still for me, like as much as I could probably try to speak intellectually about like Jeanette, for example, like I can't, you know, like the exciting part is that you can't explain it all, like that it's the sort of emotional part is a little bit bigger than us sometimes.
That's why it's not minimalist. Right. It's not minimalist. It's actually trying to say every single thing you can possibly say about this situation, and be credible.
Yeah, you're not paring it down.
No, you're trying to say as much as possible, and be true. And you know, there comes a point and I'm sure this is true for a filmmaker. There comes a point in every story that you write or in every film that you make in which you actually stand back and say, "Do I mean this?" And you have to say, "Do I mean this?"
It's just such an interesting, different challenge for film, because you're writing with the essentials in terms of what needs to happen. You're right, like there's a lot to do, there's a lot to say, there's a lot that needs to be conveyed, but we're not necessarily seeing everything all the time. Where in film, you're seeing something all the time. You get all this other information. And so it's a remarkable thing for it to also somehow be spare and somehow be essential. Because you're right, like the set design, costume, like they're all communicating something at all times, even though that may not be the most important thing in the scene.
What you said is really true, really true. It makes making a film much more, in a way, demanding. Novels, stories are forgiving forms. I think films are unforgiving forms.
That sounds generous. I'm not sure if I don't know that I would say the same. You are, but you know, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to. I know that Richard, you were not involved with the screenwriting process of this. This was something that you gave your blessing to. I'd love to know a little bit about those conversations that what that entailed, you know, but then also then where you took it in terms of. If I read correctly, there was a draft, and then Zoe Kazan became involved, and then it became a real back and forth, and so that kind of handed off to you, and then there being a twosome, and then giving it back to Richard in the form that it is.
Well, do you remember? I think the first thing you wrote back to me, I think I've highlighted it before, you know, talking about this, but you know, Richard basically said, my book is my book and your picture is your picture, and you need to essentially establish your own values, goals. And it was sort of a shocking sense of permission from somebody you admire, you know, and actually really important, and a real gift at the beginning of a process, to know, to be yourself, you know, and I think that that's so important in what we do, but I think you're constantly learning that year by year to just, you know, keep, you know, doing you.
There could be something intimidating about that too, like almost full permission can be a lot.
Well, yeah, but you know, I mean,
What you want.
yes, it's what you want, but also it was there, you know, I mean, I would not have reached out had the roots of it hadn't already grown, you know, like, so it was, you know, in fact, I was nervous when we showed Richard the film because of how much of the book is in there. And Zoe and I were like, fuck, is he gonna, you know, is he gonna be upset? Is he gonna not like the film because there's so much? And then after we were talking about the film, and you said, I can't remember what moment it was, but you were like, I love this moment of, you know, X, Y, or Z. And I said, well, yeah, I said that's from the book. And you said, no, it's not. And I'm sure it was.
Well, you're probably more right than I have any reason to think that I am, because I haven't read the book in 30 years. So
Because you don't.
Why would I read my book? I mean,
because you famously don't read your books after you've finished them. Yeah.
No. I mean, I read parts of them sometimes if someone asks me to in public, but to sit down and read the whole book, it was just, I just can't imagine anything more unpleasant. You know, but I'll say one thing about what transpired between Paul and me in our early conversations was I have over the many years that I've been writing books had lots of people come to me and want to do something with a book of mine, and they always and Paul did not. They always say to me, we want to make a book that is really make a movie that's really faithful to your book. And what they can't know is that I don't give a shit. I mean, and it's not that I'm indifferent to the movie that someone would make, but I'm indifferent to the effort to try to be faithful to my book, because there is no faithful to my book. My book is just my book, as Paul said. And so to take my book and run with it and use whatever parts of it fit into a vision of his own or one's own, that's what you hope for. You hope that out of the raw material of a book, you get a motion picture that is actually great. And you can't do that if you're worrying about the felicities or the formalities of a novel, which is already finished and done. You can just have to kind of use it, just pick and choose of its parts. So when Paul said, you know, we said that was in the book. No, it wasn't. All I think about is his movie. I don't think about my book. I just think about his picture.
Did you recognize the characters?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. The first time I've seen the movie now twice, and the first time there's always a kind of an abruptness, which is to say that he chooses a house where this takes place. It isn't the house that I have in my brain. He chooses an actor, and this young Oxenbould boy. He's a boy. He maybe he's 30 years old. I don't know how old he is. But he chooses this, and that's a different look from the boy that I had in my mind. Everything's slightly different. So it's a kind of assault, but it's not really different from the assault that any movie makes upon any moviegoer. So that when I then saw it a second time, I completely conceded everything. That I completely forgot my book, and I even told Paul this yesterday. When I saw it again, I just liked it all the more because I didn't those those lines that connected the film to my book were now finally frayed and all but gone, which is what I wanted.
Right.
So this is, I think rare in terms of, ego or wisdom to know that being overly faithful to a book is not going to make a film. I don't know that every writer knows that, is what I'm saying. But does any of that come from your experience in Hollywood when you were a younger person? Because you were there briefly, which
well, I did
everyone
for
may not
2 or 3
know.
years working for Paramount. I did try to turn a book of mine into a film, working at Paramount, unsuccessfully. And I may have learned something about fidelity to a book, because when you turn a book that is your own book into a movie, there's just a kind of an inexorable wish on your part to hang on to the best parts. And that almost always corrupts the film when you're hanging on to things which are not integral to some other vision, which is going to be the filmic vision. So I may have learned something. It's hard to believe I did, but I may have. I may have. But mostly it was people calling me on the phone and saying bullshit to me about, we're going to be very faithful. But I said, don't. And so I would end up driving these people away at some point. I said, don't talk to me anymore. Make your film.
But I'd love to hear a little bit then about. This is not me like writing onto the experience of the film or writing the film that sort of like matches into some gender dynamic that we might expect it to be. But I'm really curious about a husband and wife team writing a screenplay about a husband and wife, and if the back and forth had to do with certain shaping of those two characters in particular, how that played out.
Yeah, so this, it's funny because I don't think that we looked at it that way for us. I think I wrote a first draft. It was not in screenplay format. It was really a kind of gut response to the book. It was mostly written by the image almost. And Zoe's a proper writer. She brought an incredible sense of structure to the material. I would say my way in was through the kids. She might have come in a little bit more through Jeanette, but I don't think as a couple we came at it about the marriage. I think luckily we get along. We like each other for the most part, and that just wasn't what it was about. It was about family. It was about the kids seeing the parents change and their marriage change. So it was always through him. So a lot of it was more about how much do we show, what's the line between we want the audience to feel the parent struggle, but we don't want to explain everything. And there's you want to do your homework and know the intent behind things, and the actor's going to ask you, and, but so how to kind of strike that balance of, a little bit of mystery, but enough clarity that it's felt. And a lot of it is just, how do you turn beautiful, being inspired image or action-wise from, language, and just kind of taking feelings. There's a passage in the book, I remember 20-something pages in, where the boy's watching his mom teach swim class, and he's imagining the people around her saying, like, there's a woman with a good smile, or there's a woman with a good figure to her credit or something, but it feels like he knows that something is maybe a little bit off or wrong or, at home. And that was the feeling to me of growing up. Like, I knew something at home wasn't right, but out in the world, we were like, life's great, and just that nobody, that I don't know your like stories, and, we take these photos smiling. And I think trying to understand how to not translate, but be inspired by a paragraph like that probably led to something to do with the portrait idea, I don't know if it actually did. I'm just thinking that now. But how do you, and we stayed away from the book for a while. Zoe and I traded drafts. And then at a certain point, we went back to it, and to see, what we left behind and what we didn't, and learn from it again, be inspired by it again. Of course, the production team, I think the book was essential in spirit, just in terms of time and the place, and again it's so beautiful, the writing, and I think it gave everybody, something, whether it was, a design member or an actor.
Part of my question to you, Richard, about do you recognize the characters, is because there's this way in which there are characters that are written in a novel and that make their way into a script, and to screenwriters working their way through creating those characters, and then they get handed to actors who then interpret that differently or create. I'm wondering how, in some ways, how far away can you go from the original source and still maintain the spirit or the true core of those characters, and in a sense, is that even an ambition? Because you're saying in some ways, like, take it far away, but I do think that the power of those characters is something that you do really want to carry that forth.
Well, you certainly want to start. I shouldn't say you want to start with it. You can start with it. You can start with something that makes you have what Catherine Ann Porter called a commotion. You read a book and you feel something in your chest. You know something. It's affected you in some way. But what you ultimately do, it's not very different from beginning a novel and beginning a story and ultimately writing it to its end, and then writing it back to its front and writing it back to its end again. You get fairly far away from your initial responses to the material. If it's my material, or if it's somebody else, you just run with it. You just take it. And I mean, it's interesting to me about Jeanette, because I think that Paul certainly found something in Jeanette that when I was writing that book I did not find, and which I left a little bit blurry, which I think in a way he particularizes and makes much more precise than I made it in the book. So, I mean, you're not beholden. You're not beholden, except that this is where you start.
That character in particular is when I was curious about your feelings and whether or not it more precise is an interesting way.
Well, I don't even like my own locutions here, but the film that Paul made comes to a different dynamic for Jeanette from the dynamic that I was working with when I wrote her in the book, and it's different, and she's much more an actor, much less a victim. She's much more a person who, and this is why I think to some extent that Carey's portrayal has attracted some of the attention that it's attracted, because she's an actor here, even though she's not acting skillfully or cleanly or always under control, but she's acting. She's trying to find a way for herself. Whereas in my book, I think I made her much more passive, and Paul just found something to write, and with Zoe to write, that I didn't find to write.
And it's so interesting that it can be. I think about it now, and if we'd written the whole script thinking about just Richard's intent, I wouldn't even know where to start with that. Then you're just writing an essay about why Richard Ford's a good writer or something, and it's a good book, so it was you discovering your own, part of yourself, and it might, they're probably just different things, which is fascinating and kind of cool. And I remember with the Jeanette character, that was something where, parts of yourself, and it's fun because this was my first time writing, so it was my first experience of going, suddenly Jeanette is saying something. I remember, I don't even know if this is in the book, and if it is, then I'm misremembering
Don't ask me, I won't.
But, she says something like, "You don't want to be like me," to her son. And like that, I remember when my mom saying that to me and being like, "What? Wait, why? What's wrong?"
You wrote that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think so, but somehow it works. It's coming from somewhere else, but now you're suddenly creating things for the new character.
Right. You write a line like that, and then you have to write the consequence to a line like that. It's fortuitous when you write it, perhaps, or spontaneous when you write it, but then once you put it down, you have it, and it has a source of strength, emotional strength, and then you, when I say run with it or go with it, what you do then is you write the consequence of that, what somebody else thinks or says, then what somebody else thinks or says. It takes it in a whole other direction from what its original material might have been.
I mean, I was reading an interview that you did at some point, Richard, and it's interesting how a particular novel might attract Paul's approach to you to make a film like this, and yet maybe deep down there's a real sort of like fundamental philosophical agreement between the two of you as artists, whether or not that's you knew that going into it. But you were saying something about, and I'm going to paraphrase or butcher it, and hopefully it will sound familiar to you, this notion of being uncomfortable with the notion of character in some way. That character is in some ways not really related to the human experience, is that we are not fixed characters. We're not, you know, our borders are more porous, and that we evolve in unpredictable ways, and from one moment to the next we might be different people. And you write, and certainly that's evidenced by your fiction. I also feel like that's certainly in what I'm seeing in terms of these characters in wildlife, which is, I think, a tricky thing to pull off in terms of direction for actors to play. You know, that there's something that's quite lived about there being this porosity, but then really where does the character begin and end?
This is, do you know what he's talking about? Because it's
Yes,
a great quote. It's a great quote of
Yes.
yours, and I think it also maybe comes from feeling like where you come from and your family. It's not like you talked about who you guys were. It was more like through your actions. So you were kind of always putting together the pieces.
After the fact.
Yes.
After the fact, yeah.
Which I feel the same way. And in fact, when I read that, it made a lot of sense. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I also think like it would make me so angry to, when, you know, I mean, sometimes some brains work, things have to be black and white to understand the world. So people like to put boxes and labels on things. But for me, it's so gray. Mm-hmm. And to be reductive about the human experience or like my, you know, emotional life is just not something that, you know, would excite me at all. And it would feel like a betrayal to, you know, what I'm trying to make something about. But I wonder if it also comes from like a family that doesn't talk about like, you know, what they're feeling or something, and you're sort of left kind of putting it together. And I think you talked about that was sort of almost an entrance into making up stories or characters.
Exactly. I mean, there doesn't seem to me to be very much difference between writing a novel and living a life. You're just dealing with and trying to make cohesive what happens next. And what happens next is sometimes something that you cause, and sometimes it's something that nothing causes. Sometimes it's something that other people cause that you can't control, and yet you, because you are the center of your own life, you're trying to make up a kind of cohesive narrative about it. And one of the ways that we inherit that notion of how that narrative is energized is to posit that we have a kind of center, and that's kind of an Emersonian notion of a mass in our middle that authorizes what we do. But I've never found that mass, and I've never found it to be true in anybody else. I think it's just all like, we're all like ants on a cupcake.
I think we should leave, so let that sit for a little bit. But Paul, as an actor, is that how you always approach parts too, in the idea of a character, that there needs to be a porosity, there needs to be something that's not so ascribed, and that might at times cause tension in terms of there being a real intent behind a character, but then you want to soften that a bit, or you want to make that more diffuse?
Well, I think so, but you know, I think it's just how it is to me and how life is to me. I mean, I remember, you know, there's definitely like a style of acting that is like the feed it down the tube style of acting, the tube being the camera, which is like really feed it down the tube. It's something somebody said once, and it makes a lot of sense, and it's perfect for like an action movie, right? Where you know the camera's going to push in on one moment and you say a line, and you know it doesn't need to be anything else but that. But yeah, I just I don't think that's my strong suit anyways, but only because that's just not my experience of the world.
Yeah.
That seems like what great acting is. That just seems to me not feeding it down the tube. But you know, when the actors come to you and say, you know, they want to get a kind of a line on what are the motivations for this and how, but you're just winging it when you do that. I mean, you're kind of thinking, you're trying to sound authoritative and reduce it a little bit, but really and truly, you probably think to yourself, gee, I'll say this, but maybe.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I might just not be confident enough to even do that, because I think a lot of it's just about searching. Like, you know, you're poking around and, you know, you're trying to be in a moment. Acting is probably, you know, much different than making a film or writing is, you know, in that regard. You're kind of trying to stay in a slightly unknowable space as well. You need to, I do think you know, intent is important, but then you throw it away and, you know, you learn your scales, then forget them, kind of, you know.
It's dramatic. It's dramatic to stay in that space, because you don't know what's going to happen next, and if you're intent and intense, and you're keeping what's as much as you can in your brain at the same, all at one time, what you say is going to be an issuance from all that stuff. And it's not that you can't be wrong. You can be wrong. You can say the wrong thing, but you have a chance of saying something interesting. Because you know, there's a script, but there is no script in a sense.
Yeah. What I find so interesting about the ants on the cupcake is no, seriously.
I knew there was more there.
It's great because that could be viewed as not cynical, but like the writing is so compassionate, right? I find so much love in your writing. So, you know, that doesn't feel like ants on a cupcake to me. And it's interesting that we're talking about a book and a film that's from a kid's point of view, because I don't think a kid is looking at ants on a cupcake. You're trying to make sense of the mess, you know, so it's
provisional. That sense is provisional. It's not a sense that's going to last much past the end of the movie. It's not going to last much past the end of the book, but it's a provisional sense that gives the reader something to contemplate and have a conversation with.
In terms of from the kid's point of view, is that's the moment you want to be reassured. You want to be reassured that there's a meaning, that there's a purpose, that there's something fixed, and instead you're finding out it's quite the opposite. Is that we are ants in the cupcake, that there is no, that we're not destined to become a certain person.
What's the virtue of art?
Yeah.
It's the virtue of art, that it fixes something provisionally while you're in it, and then you go out of it, and then there are all the ants. But for that moment, there is a solace, and there is a pleasure, and there is a kind of almost renewal.
I think we're wrapping. Are we no? All right. Trying to figure out what our next move, but I think we have actually come a bit to the end. But I would love to know, Richard. You said that people have approached you before. There are no other adaptations in the works in terms of your fiction.
No. No. I'm not an easy person to work with at the beginning, and I get easier as things go along. But if it doesn't happen because I'm not easy to work with at the beginning, then it just doesn't happen. And that's usually what most people have an interest in. They want to say, I've got this book under option. That's what they want to say. Well, to get that book under option with me, you've got to go through me, and I've driven off more people than I've cozied up to. But you can't, I'd seen his work, and I knew what kind of person he was from what kind of actor he is. I'd seen things that he did, and so when we had lunch one day, it was all corroborated for me. I just thought, well, this is a human being.
That's That's quite something. Yeah.